Bonjour mes amis, bienvenue à ma 6e vidéo de Pokémon, où on va discuter la génération 6, particulièrement les Pokémon qui ont fait ses débuts dans Pokémon X et Pokémon Y. Bien que il y ait des Pokémon qui ont fait ses débuts dans Pokémon Omega Ruby et Pokémon Alpha Sapphire. For those of you who can't speak French, hello and welcome to my video in which I will talk about my 6 favorite and 6 least favorite Pokemon from Generation 6. I liked Pokemon X a lot when I played through it. I'm a huge Francophile, so I was psyched out of my mind that we finally had a Pokemon generation taking place not in Japan, not in the US, but in France. And man, Kalos was so cool. I loved it. I loved all the influences from France. Oh, it was great. Now, if you know something about me, I love a good video game soundtrack. And let me tell you, Pokemon X and Pokemon Y, without a doubt, up to that point, had the best soundtrack in any Pokemon game. In most Pokemon games, the soundtrack's okay sometimes, there's a really good song here and there, but most of it is kind of like, whatever. But Pokemon X and Pokemon Y, I only played for Pokemon X, had such great soundtracks, especially the cities, and the battle music was wonderful. Man, it totally blew me away. And on top of that, you had great character customization, great implementation of online functionality, probably the best implementation of online functionality in any Pokemon game. And you know what? Screw the haters, I loved Lysandre. However, flash forward a few years, and Pokemon X, to me, is one of the most forgettable Pokemon games. Compared to previous generations, Generation 6 is very shallow with lots of pandering, and I mean a lot of pandering, especially Gen 1 pandering. This pandering took a lot away from not just the games as a whole, but also from the Pokemon specifically. Now, an argument can be made that Gens 4 and 5 had too many legendary Pokemon. I don't necessarily agree with it, but there are some fair points there, so we can say that, okay, they had a lot of legendary Pokemon. But you know what? Generation 6 totally swung the other way, too far, and has barely any. In fact, it reuses legendary Pokemon from Gen 1, in place of having an actual legendary trio and post-game fights. In fact, the only in-game legendary Pokemon in Gen 6 are the mascot legendaries, Xerneas and Yveltal, and then just one Pokemon, Zygarde, which is stuck at the end, just like Mewtwo, who, by the way, is in the game as well, as sort of the only thing in the entire post-game. It's just really disappointing, and because they stuck in Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, and Mewtwo instead of having actual legendaries, there isn't a lot of cool legendaries to encounter and fight in Generation 6, which is a shame because Generation 6 was the first and only generation in which I went into the games mostly blind, not knowing what Pokemon I would find, and I wound up ending the game pretty disappointed because instead of ending the game with a whole bunch of legendaries and having encountered a bunch of Pokemon, not having any legendaries led the generation to only have less than 70 Pokemon. But there were other reasons for that. This generation was sort of where the Pokemon Company and Game Freak realized that instead of making new Pokemon or new evolutions for old Pokemon, all they had to do was just make new versions of old Pokemon. Not actual new Pokemon, but just make a game mechanic that involves new versions of old Pokemon, and use those instead of new Pokemon, and market those as new Pokemon, instead of actually making genuinely new Pokemon. So even though we got 69, I think, Pokemon in Generation 6, there were a whole bunch of Mega Evolutions for old Pokemon. And while I like Mega Evolutions, don't get me wrong, there were some really cool ones, and I like the mechanic. What I don't like is that the Pokemon Company and Game Freak marketed and continues to market, well, they don't really talk about Mega Evolutions now, but by the end of Gen 6, continue to market these Mega Evolutions as if they're new Pokemon, to build up hype as if they're new Pokemon. And that's just disingenuous, and I don't like that those Mega Evolutions were force-fed to us instead of giving us genuinely new Pokemon to fill out Generation 6 roster. Now, on top of that, think about previous generations, especially Generation 1, which is not my favorite generation, but is one of the best generations, certainly, and did a lot of things right. Think about Generation 1. Every single Pokemon in that generation has some sort of personality. Now, mind you, some of them kind of forgettable, like, say, Tangela, but all the Pokemon have a personality. Not just the fully evolved ones, but the basic stages, too, and the Stage 1 Pokemon. All of them have some sort of personality and something going on with them. In Generation 6, I feel like that wasn't the case. Now, Gen 5 had a lot of unmemorable Pokemon that bloated its Pokédex, but I still feel like there was something going on with each and every individual Pokemon in that generation. In Generation 6, there's a lot of cool, fully evolved Pokemon, but the lower stages don't really seem to have any purpose to exist other than as a means to get the fully evolved Pokemon. So they feel like filler Pokemon, not to fill up the Pokédex, but just to give these final forms some basic and Stage 1 form. And you'll see that they're going to show up in my least favorite list, some of these Pokemon that I see as existing for no reason other than to evolve into a cooler Pokemon. Now, with only about 69 Pokemon in the generation, you would think that you'd be getting quality over quantity. Certainly with Gen 5 we got quantity over quality, but do we get quality in Gen 6? I would say not really. Now mind you, I like the Generation 6 Pokemon overall more than the Gen 5 Pokemon. Gen 6 to me is about on par with Gen 4, but even though there are Pokemon that I really like in Gen 6, I still find them forgettable. How could that be? There are Pokemon that I really like that are still forgettable. Well, it's because due to Pokemon X and Pokemon Y pandering so much, you could play through the entire game without any Generation 6 Pokemon. You could, in fact, just use Gen 1 Pokemon and play through the entire game. And what that did is it sort of shoves the Gen 6 Pokemon out of the spotlight. It makes them feel less important to the games as a whole, and leads to the Gen 6 Pokemon feeling like they're just there rather than contributing meaningfully to the series. As you'll see in my next video, if I bring it up, I feel the same way about Generation 7. And because there was no Pokemon Z, we didn't even have an opportunity to go back to Kalos and cement those Pokemon into our minds. And they're barely used in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, although those are remakes, so that's more understandable, but they're barely used in Generation 7 as well. So we really don't have very many opportunities to see these Gen 6 Pokemon, remember that they exist, and use them on our teams, which is really a bummer. So ultimately, to me, even though when I played through it, I really liked Pokemon X and was sure it was one of my favorite entries, in the end, it's not my least favorite Pokemon game, but Pokemon X was a bare-bones entry that was unfortunately overshadowed almost completely, not just by its own pandering, but by Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. And that's not just because Pokemon Sapphire was my favorite Pokemon game. In fact, when I think of Generation 6, I actually have to remind myself that Pokemon X and Pokemon Y happened, because I almost always think just of Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. So if you haven't noticed, there's a lot I have to say about Generation 6. In my last video I mentioned that to me, Generation 5 as a whole marked one of the highest points of the Pokemon franchise, and unfortunately, sort of like Gen 4 compared to Gen 3, Gen 6 takes a dip compared to Generation 5, and there's quite a bit of good stuff in Generation 6, but there's a lot of things that I find frustrating, and I'll have more to say about that actually in the Gen 7 video, because some of those things stick around in the Gen 7. But I don't want to sit here talking about my beefs and fondnesses for things from Generation 6, so what are my top 6 favorite and least favorite Pokemon from Generation 6? Well, this isn't a top 10 video, but if we were to make it a top 10, round things out, here are the Pokemon that would fill out my top 10 least favorite Pokemon from Generation 6. And here are the Pokemon that would fill out my top 10 favorite Pokemon from Generation 6. And by the way, there will be no Mega Pokemon on this video. As I said, and as you might have noticed, even all the way back to my Gen 1 Pokemon video, I don't consider Mega Pokemon new Pokemon, and I don't consider them new Gen 6 Pokemon. I consider them alternate forms of old Pokemon, no different from the different forms of Castform or Giratina or other Pokemon like that. So I don't really factor Mega Evolution into my list of favorite Pokemon that I've come up with, but when I do, they are as forms for Pokemon, not as new Pokemon for Generation 6. So likewise, Gen 7 will not have any regional Alola. Maybe I'll make a separate video for Mega Pokemon or Mega Evolutions and for regional variants, but not right now. So, with that out of the way, let us move on to my 6th least favorite Pokemon from Generation 6. This is sort of a weird one to start the list off with, because I don't really have much to say about Scatterbug. I love Vivillon, who unfortunately did not qualify for my top 6 list, but its basic form Scatterbug is actually really forgettable. It fills the same niche and general appearance as Caterpie, Weedle, Wurmple, Grubbin, and even kind of Swaddle, but with its neutral colors and overall uninteresting appearance, it really does not stand out from the crowd. Again, I love Vivillon, so you would think that I would remember Scatterbug, but I honestly forgot for a while that it existed until I made this video. I hate goats, and I'm not insanely crazy about Go-Goat, so you would think that something like Skiddo, who gameplay-wise is completely forgettable, would not be very high on my favorites list. Well, obviously you're wrong. What Skiddo lacks in memorability or competitive edge, it makes up for by being without a doubt one of the cutest Pokemon out there. It is freaking adorable, and I give its design very high marks. This is especially notable because I don't like how real-world goats look. Skiddo has one other claim to fame. It has been a long while since I played through Pokemon X, so forgive me for forgetting the details, but let me tell you that there are 2 homeless Skiddo in Lumiose City that will break your heart. Like Scatterbug, Fletchling is one of those Pokemon that I don't dislike per se, but that clearly seem to exist for the sole purpose of being the basic stage of a more memorable Pokemon. Given its competitive strength and terrible name, it is impossible not to remember Talonflame when thinking of Generation 6 Pokemon, but Fletchling on its own is very forgettable. It's not even a fire-flying type like its evolutions. Its design also bothers me sometimes. There are some angles where it looks kind of cute, but other angles, such as in its Kangsugimori artwork, where it looks really ugly. The concept of it being an arrow is pretty neat, but Fletchling is just the Gen 6 Pokemon I'm not crazy about. It's a frilled lizard that also looks kind of like a droopy-eared dog, and it has solar panels. I was really pleasantly surprised by Helioptile the first time I started using it, and grew to love it once I taught it Volt Switch and Parabolic Charge. This is just a really fun Pokemon to use, especially when your opponent doesn't know it's coming and you get to switch in on a Water-type move.
I played all the way through Pokemon X with it since the moment I caught it, and I don't regret it one bit. For the record, I also happen to love Heliolisk, but between the two, Helioptile wins out for its cute design. I'm not sure whether to call it Helioptile or Helioptile, but whatever. It's cute. I love it. Let's move on. I hate this thing. I really hate this thing. It tries to be cute, but I think it's ugly. Hoopa, to me, more than any other of the recent event Pokemon, represents everything I hate about Mystery Gift now. I hate that mythical Pokemon have become government handouts that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company just toss you randomly for free. I hate that even though Game Freak does this, even though you can receive these Pokemon easily via Wi-Fi, Game Freak and the Pokemon Company still make you go to GameStop, the worst video game store in the United States, in order to get some of these Pokemon. You can't just pick up the code either. No, you have to talk to somebody at a cash register. Somebody who may be a nice person, but is still required to offer pre-orders and guides and other merchandise that you don't want in order to guilt trip you into letting them suck your wallet dry. I hate that Victini, who I love by the way, was the last event Pokemon to trigger an in-game event. For those of you who don't know, when you receive the Victini mystery gift, you don't unlock the Pokemon. No, instead you get a special item that lets you take a ferry to a lone lighthouse where Victini resides. It is up to you to use your skill to catch Victini. This is how many event Pokemon used to work, particularly in Gens 3, 4, and 5. You get to search for the Pokemon, you get to fight the Pokemon, you get to catch the Pokemon with whatever ball you like, you get to nickname the Pokemon, and it doesn't get boosted experience points when you want it on your team. It made event Pokemon feel like a part of the Pokemon universe. I was fine with the Wi-Fi distributions of Keldeo, Meloetta, and Genesect because it was clear Gen 5 was being rushed anyway, but there is just no excuse for how mythical Pokemon were treated in Generations 6 and 7, especially because there were clear and easy ways to integrate Diancie, Volcanion, and Hoopa into X and Y, or Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire in the case of Hoopa. So on its own, I would say that Hoopa is one of my least favorite legendary Pokemon, but it gets really close to the bottom because of what it represents to me. Missed opportunity after missed opportunity and a general dumbing down of the Pokemon games. What saves Hoopa from the bottom of my Gen 6 list is its typing, because I'm a sucker for ghost types, and its unbound form, which looks kind of cool. So, Malamar is kind of in a weird position, because although I quite like it, it has the misfortune of being on my team in Pokemon Ultra Sun. Now, why is that a problem, you might ask? Well, I'm not enjoying my return to Alola very much at all, and it's been a very underwhelming experience for me, so all the Pokemon on my team in that game are unfortunately sort of the face of that game for me right now. So, right now, at this moment, I don't feel too hot about Malamar. But, setting that aside and talking about how I feel about the Pokemon itself, I think it's a really cool concept. What an evil-looking thing. It's kind of a mastermind, the brains of an evil syndicate, if you will. It looks like it could be Emperor Palpatine's favorite Pokemon, doesn't it? I love that this Pokemon gets the ability Contrary because it's a really fun ability to use against my friends, but especially against the computer. The Pokemon that you fight in the games just have no idea what to do with a Pokemon that knows Contrary. It's so funny and so satisfying every time they try to lower my stats. And the Topsy-Turvy move is fun to use too. Overall, Malamar is a sweet concept that, to me, has only just recently been tarnished by a mediocre entry in the Pokemon series. Hopefully, Ultra Sun gets better. I'm just on the 3rd island right now, so there's room for it to improve. Speaking of Ultra Sun, Litleo had a chance to win my favor. I was on the 2nd island and really strapped for a fire Pokemon that I'd never used before, and I was thinking, oh, you know, Pyroar was kind of popular with fans back in 2013. Maybe I could use a Litleo. And you know what? Litleo's not in Ultra Sun. In fact, almost just after thinking about that, I encountered Fletchling, which, as you saw, I'm not a big fan of, and I remembered how much I don't care for Litleo. Generation 4 introduced a weird cross between a lynx and a lion in the form of Shinx, Luxio, and Luxray, and I really loved that family. Shinx in particular is a great looking Pokemon, so imagine my disappointment when Generation 6 got its own lion cub, and that lion cub was butt ugly compared to Shinx. Like, it looks like it had a completely different designer, doesn't it? I do have a sneaking suspicion that the Gen 6 and Gen 7 Pokemon have a different person behind the reins of their design, because the art style and feel is pretty different, but we won't go into that right now. Anyway, Litleo is very ugly outside of its Dreamworld artwork, and it is also another forgettable early stage Gen 6 Pokemon with a memorable evolution. Gee, how about that? Now, I know that I just spouted off a lot of hate for Hoopa, so you might be wondering why Litleo is placed beneath it. If you've been following my Pokemon videos, you should be familiar by now that there are two different types of Pokemon that I rate poorly. Those that I hate, and those that are so unmemorable that the joy they give me is less than the joy I get from hating on a different Pokemon. So yeah, I hate Hoopa, but at least Hoopa leads to an interesting discussion about the state of the main series Pokemon games. Litleo does nothing, and so there it is. Let's move on. Alright, you guys, we've moved into the Gen 6 God tier. Look at this guy. Look at this Pokemon. How can you not love this Pokemon? It's so... I don't know how to describe it. It makes me think of the Mad Hatter from Disney's Alice in Wonderland, or maybe Ludwig von Koopaling from the Mario games. It looks like it would have a soft German accent, doesn't it? Or maybe it would sound like that Jack-in-the-Box from the stop-motion Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Christmas special. You know, like, "Hey guys!" Something like that. Oh, the moment I laid eyes on this guy, I knew exactly what I would name it. Klaus. Oh my god! Look at that face! Look, I'm gonna talk like Klaus. Oh, guten Tag! It's Klaus! Let me just come right in. Oh, we're going to be making cookies today! You know what my trainer likes about Klaus? Not only is Klaus good in battle, oh, but Klaus can serve too! Make that, baby! Oh, fighting with Klaus just gets better and better the faster you play in the game! Ding, ding, ding! Oh! I have to go back to mein Christoph! Auf Wiedersehen! Ta-ta! I just can't get enough of this Pokemon. It's so fun, and it fit wonderfully with my theme of European names for my Pokemon and Pokemon X. But now let's make like Klaus and move on. So thank goodness I had Pokemon X, because it means I was not stuck with this abomination. A popular fan theory is that Spritzee and Aromatisse are based in part on plague doctors. I ascribe to this theory. It just vaguely helps Aromatisse, but it still does not do Spritzee any favors. It's a terrible design no matter how you frame it. On first sight it looks like a bird, but as a bird nothing looks right. Once you think of it as having a plague doctor's mask, it's a little better, but the beak is too short to be cool looking. The biggest problem going for Spritzee, though, is that it is supposed to be a powder puff, or whatever it's called, that is used by people to apply makeup. This may be unsurprising as a boy, but I hate makeup and would rather people just not use it. This barely even looks like a Pokemon, too, a far cry from other inanimate objects like Magnemite or Voltorb. There are simply no positives to this Pokemon. I do not care for it in the slightest. Xerneas is easily one of my favorite Pokemon, and certainly one of my favorite legendary Pokemon. They really knocked it out of the ballpark with its design. It hits an incredible sweet spot that I don't think anybody expected a Pokemon to hit. A beautiful blend of Norse mythology and Ghibli-esque design. You easily could have plucked this Pokemon from Princess Mononoke, which is one of my favorite movies. It also wonderfully incorporates the aspects of Norse mythology that it represents. It is a breathtaking Pokemon that controls your attention wherever you see it. Seriously, this has one of my favorite designs out of any Pokemon to date. I normally play the quote-unquote second version in a generation, blue version, silver version, sapphire version, etc. But the moment I saw Xerneas, I knew I had to pick Pokemon X instead of Pokemon Y. I am a massive deer fan, and Xerneas, above all the other Servid Pokemon, it's godly. There's just no other way to put it. On top of that wonderful cake, is the sweet, sweet icing of its battle music. Xerneas' battle music, which it shares with Yveltal and Zygarde, really makes you feel like you are challenging the gods, especially when combined with the regal pose Xerneas has in battle and the ethereal environment you are in when you fight it. It is some of my favorite Pokemon battle music, if not my top favorite. Xerneas is just such an awesome Pokemon. I'm really happy and almost proud to have it in my top 6. Furfrou hits a lot of marks. It is forgettable. It has a terrible design. And yes, the planets have aligned. I also hate its guts. Furfrou immediately, before ripping on anything else, is a pain in the ass to fight. Encountering them in Pokemon X and Pokemon Ultra Sun was a miserable affair. The ability Furfrou has makes this otherwise mediocre Pokemon into an early game tank that makes you want to pull your hair out trying to kill it. Its ability, if you don't recall, is Fur Coat, which doubles its defense stat. Early in the game, you do not have a large variety of special attacks that you can use against Furfrou, and to make matters worse, you definitely do not have any special fighting attacks to use against Furfrou, so yeah, it's not fun. It also has an ugly design that does not even improve if you change its form. Its head looks like a rat's, not a dog's. Primarina, by the way, shares this problem. But get this! Furfrou, despite being terrible to my knowledge in competitive play and not being memorable in the slightest, has a huge gimmick that requires every future game to have somebody to allow it to change forms. So, if you take Furfrou to a hair salon, you can change its form. But we can't allow Furfrou to be a fun Pokemon. No, we have to make owning a Furfrou like owning a real dog. So after 5 days, it just goes back to its original form. You have to keep spending money to keep it in whatever other form you want. And it gets worse, because wacky pet haircuts are really ethically vague. I would actually argue that it is unethical to give your pet a wacky haircut. Real-life, non-human animals do not ask to be given wild and sometimes debilitating haircuts, nor do they ask to be stuffed into clothing and costumes. Forcing an animal to suffer the consequences of a hairstyle it does not want, including scaring away or miscommunicating with other members of its own species, is irresponsible as a pet owner and is absolutely not in the pet's best interests. And yet, here we have it, a Pokemon that just begs for you to give it a million girly hairstyles and hats. In its own way, it encourages the belief that behavior like this in the real world is okay, and I just cannot get behind that. Furfrou is a terrible Pokemon, and without a doubt, my least favorite one from Generation 6. So, somewhere in Japan, an employee for Game Freak and the Pokemon Company must have woken up and decided that there aren't enough Pokemon that fit anime tropes, so they designed Meowstic. Here we have a happy-go-lucky, dopey male Meowstic and a female Meowstic whose design screams coup did it trope. And I freaking love it. I freaking love this Pokemon. I don't think it is the best Pokemon out there competitively, but that did not stop me from using a female one throughout the game in Pokemon X and enjoying every moment of it. You know, a lot of Pokemon didn't benefit hugely from the jump to 3D polygon models in Generation 6, but I really have to hand it to them. Meowstic really shows the potential that 3D Pokemon have. If you just look at a static image of Meowstic, it looks like an ordinary feline Pokemon. But in battle, in 3D where all of its motions are animated, you see that actually those ears are long rabbit-like ears that are just folded up. And that when Meowstic attacks, it unfolds those ears and reveals a whole second pair of eyes. Whoa! And female Meowstic in particular is just so cool in battle, never breaking a sweat, and just staring at the opponent with those chill, uncaring eyes. Big scary Mewtwo? Meowstic could care less. It's just such a cool concept. But Meowstic has another concept. It's the first time that two sexes of a single Pokemon species get separate movesets. I mean, obviously that happened in Generation 1 with the Nidoran family, but to this day the Pokédex lies and tells us that Nidoran female is a separate species from Nidoran male. This is the first time that the two sexes are actually considered the same species, and it's weird, but cool. They even look totally different color-wise. There's just a lot to like about Meowstic, there really is. I named mine Kari after the girl in the first 2 seasons of the Digimon anime. And, of course, I named the male one that sat in my PC, TK, after the boy from those same seasons. I'm sure there are a lot of awesome names people can come up with for Meowstic. If you had one, let me know in the comments below. So there you have it. Those are my favorite and least favorite Pokemon from Generation 6. As I said, Generation 6 has a lot of unmemorable Pokemon, even ones that I really like, so it's unfortunate. But it's not my least favorite generation. It's sort of, in the end, it's sort of kind of in the middle, and it's certainly in the, it's right in the middle, actually. I would say it's neither in my top favorite generations, nor in my least favorite generations for Pokemon. It's sort of in the middle, but I would say I dislike it more than I like it. But there's some good stuff in it. If you have any Pokemon that you like from Generation 6, or if you really want to make a case for me to make a favorite Mega Pokemon, Mega Evolution, sorry, video, please let me know in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions, I'm still a newbie for these top favorite videos. So if you have any suggestions or critique, please feel free to let me know about that in the comments below as well. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Merci bien et à bientôt.